Hi, I'm Mike Burrows. I'm founder of Agenda Shift, author of 3 books, and you're listening to the Agile Uprising podcast.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Agile Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Jay Hersko. Joining me once again, I have a polymath, right? Is the only word I can think to describe him. Author, presenter, trainer, author of books such as Agenda Shift, Right to Left. Now we're here to talk about his new book, Organizing Conversations, Mr. Mike Burrows. Mike, thanks for joining.
Jay, really great to be back.
And we are glad to have you. So Mike, honestly, I didn't even know you were working on something new. I have been lurking in your Slack group. I don't post a lot, but I do see the conversations going on. And I saw you post something and I went, oh my, there's a new book out. And I didn't even realize. And then real quickly, I IM'd you and said, hey, I just picked it up. Can we chat shortly? So I'm going to start off with, I'll start off with a simple question, Mike. So this is part of a series and it's with in dialogic organizational development.
Yep.
So for people that aren't familiar with that word, what does dialogic mean? How should they think about that?
It means based on dialogue. So yes, it's a funny word, an awkward word, but it covers like one half of the organization development OD spectrum. When you look at how people describe an organization development process, certainly if you look in older books, and thinking back to those 1990s models of change, the ones that I scoff in my books, the ones I mean. But they're what's called a diagnostic approach. Someone tells you what's wrong with you, prescribes some changes, some fixes, some solutions. Then it's a process of rolling those solutions out, and then you're left with living with the consequences of a process that we all know. Those kinds of approaches are very, very unreliable. The kind of approach that works, the kind of planned approach, analytical and planned approach that works for technical challenges are a lot less reliable on adaptive challenges. And organizational change is, like product development in competitive environments, which, Agile evolved to cope with with that problem there. In organization development, we also need high participation, high experimentation, high iteration, all the things that we on the Agile side have got used to.
Mm-hmm.
The OD community has finally recognized the need for those there. And I say finally recognized, there have been OD practitioners doing this like forever.
Right.
But it's only in the last 10, 15 years that it's actually been recognized as a thing. And as a thing distinct from the diagnostic side of things.
You can't solve people problems like you solve code problems, right?
Yes.
And I think to your point, Mike, we look at things like they're mechanical. Oh, I'll just deploy this process and I'll communicate and I'll do giant pictures and email everybody and that'll just work. And then we sit there and we act almost stymied when it doesn't.
Yes. And the really clever thing is it actually harnesses the thing that breaks the old way of doing things. So, the old way of doing things, the problem is complexity. And, I don't want to get all nerdy about it. We've got lots of people and lots of relationships, lots of different preferences and all the rest of it. And no one can predict how the organization is going to respond to really any kind of stimulus, any kind of change, any kind of novelty. But why not harness that?
Mm-hmm.
Why not have ideas coming from people that are close to the problems they are trying to solve? Why not, we can work to a strategy that we put together and motivated by something that we've put together ourselves, then implement our own solution ideas locally. So you're harnessing the latent, innovative capacity of the organization in order to solve its problems. The parallels with what we've learned in Agile are really clear. It has some slightly different challenges to solve, and it's much less technology dependent than we are used to in Agile. But you can understand things in quite a similar way, especially in the process sense.
One of the things, so I picked this up and I blasted through it, and then I stopped and I actually read it through it again slowly. I said, okay, let me go at half speed now, and I got highlights and notes everywhere. The whole idea of, and I saw a lot of resonance with a lot of the stuff that Dave Snowden talks about, right? Where the idea of narrative and the idea of what you think is happening and what people are telling each other is happening are typically two completely different things.
Yes.
And what people are telling each other is happening is way more important and way more impactful than what I think I'm observing
Yes.
from my seat up in the totem pole somewhere.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it made
That's
total.
actually that's a super thing to pick up on, actually. I've just published this book. This is otherwise known as book 4. And book 5, which is about the more organization, not it's about how organizations work, really picks up on that same idea. There are two ways of approaching understanding of organization. There's a kind of a top-down analytical approach,
Mhm.
which works very well when you're looking at the most stable attributes of an organization, its formal structure, its most lasting environmental market relationships, those kinds of things. But if you want to address what it feels like to work in the organization, you've got to get to the level of people's experiences.
Mhm.
And a top-down analytical approach isn't going to get to that, or at least not get to that easily and quickly. Although books 4 and 5 are tackling different things, that idea of starting with experiences, starting with story, is super important. And particularly when you have stories of struggle, if you're a fan of job stories, you'll know where I'm going with this. You've got stories of struggle. How do we make meaningful progress?
Mhm.
Starting to think about, well, there's the clunky ways that we make progress now. With some changes, we can make progress in a much more natural way, one that wastes a lot less of our energy, so that we can be focusing our efforts on more interesting things.
The conversation I try to have at work all the time is I try to explain to people there is a definitive difference between a story and a narrative. And the example I use is story is Mike saying to another employee, I work for J&J's a good boss. That's a story. But a
Yeah,
bunch of people saying, hey, I work for J&J's a good boss, that builds the narrative.
yeah,
And too often we create a story and we tell people you just need to copy that story,
yeah,
not realizing that you're fighting a larger narrative, which is it's an idea that's outside of your direct
yeah.
control. So all you
Well,
can do is poke at it and either introduce an entirely new one and build up some energy there, or you got to poke and shift. You got to
this
poke.
again is why participation is so important, because when you put people together, then the stories that resonate with each other will assemble into that narrative, and you've got something you can work with.
Mm,
And those that matter only to a few people, um, you know, their time will come when the right people get together to deal with it. But you've got an approach here that you may have a diverse group of people from different parts of your organization, and what will emerge are the constraints that are common to all of them.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
that's powerful, and so you can, sometimes identify some really fundamental issues um, just by choosing people from diverse parts of the organization. Obviously, if you want to fix a team, you start with people in the team. But for organizational issues, you want a more diverse
Right.
representation.
Pull from
Three or more
all the
levels of
different pieces.
organization, as I always say. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Mike, this is a book. It's in part of a series. I think there's like 7 or 8 of them. I actually have
Yeah.
two upstairs in one
Yeah.
of my to
Yeah.
read
I've
piles.
got one on my desk with. That's another one. That's Jervis Bush's one with. You can see I've bookmarked it quite extensively.
So I'm glad you showed that one. So Jervis is his name. Is that how I say it?
It's pronounced Jervis Bush. Yes.
Jervis. How did you get hooked up with this group, and how did they rope you in and say, "Hey, Mike, you want
Yeah,
to write a book
well,
on it?"
it's actually quite a cool story. So in the Agenda Shift second edition, I referenced this book, The Dynamics of Generative Change. As you know, I reference heavily in my books, not in a way that gets in the way of the flow of the book. It's footnotes mostly, but that book in particular did actually get some like front page billing in the book, because I realized it really well described what we were trying to do. And I thought it's fantastic that from the world of academic OD, if I can call it that, there was a model that really resonated. And it resonated in a surprising way. I thought because one of the tools, one of the most popular tools of Agenda Shift is its assessments. I thought Agenda Shift must be a diagnostic approach, but actually it is so much more a dialogic approach, where inquiry, where generative conversations that lead to solutions are most of what we do. So I described briefly, what the model was about, and I did Jervis the courtesy of saying, here's the draft manuscript of the book. Can you check that it's all right? And he quickly wrote back saying, yeah, that's fine, go for it. And then many months later, he wrote back to me completely out of the blue. I had no idea this was coming, saying, hey, I read your book, your book cover to cover, really liked it. How'd you like to write a book for our series? And as a blog post I published this week tells you, it only took me a mere 2.5 years to write it. These books aren't thick; they're 100 pages.
Well, that's
Um,
the thing when you said that. You said it took you two
yeah,
and a half years, and I'm like, this is a lot of knowledge condensed into a small form. And
yeah,
I actually remarked to one of my coworkers. My first question is, well, have you read Agenda Shift? And I get no's, and I'm like, okay. So if you haven't read Agenda Shift, start with this. This is the short version.
yeah,
But I say I'm using a giant air quote disclaimer that there's way more in the full book than this, but this gets your mind thinking in
yes,
outcomes and all
yes,
that.
yes.
But
Well,
Mike,
yeah, my first draft really was kind of what does a 100-page condensed version of a generative look like?
and he
Um,
pushed back on you, which I thought
he
was
did
interesting.
push, well, he did push back on it, and he was right to, well, kind of what's the point, um, and what he's really good at, and you'll see there's a conversation in the introduction that I produced verbatim, an email conversation that started the book, and he's always asking me questions that are provoking me to say, not just what would I do, but why? What's my theory of action, as he would
That
put it, in
that
very
quote,
very OD terms.
I got it
Yeah,
on a post-it here, Mike, because I love
yeah,
that idea. The idea of theory of action. It's not what, but
yes,
why. What's the
yes,
theory behind it?
yes.
That made me stop. And that honestly, Mike, you were like 2 pages in, and I'm
Yes.
sitting here in the yard before it got 9,000 degrees
So,
here,
so in
and I'm
some
staring
ways, even
off
though,
in
even though,
space.
even though it's a shorter book than the Agenda Shift second edition, it is in some ways a deeper book, I think, because there's much more why there.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes it easier then for, a practitioner, for example, to take the different tools that I describe and use them in their own way, assemble them together in a different way, configure them, and so on. And it's been really helpful to me because I've been forced to confront things that, explicitly, that were only ever implicit. There were things that were like I took as part of my style, and I now interpret, slightly differently. For example, avoiding convergence is a feature, not a bug, and
Mm-hmm.
there are alternatives to it as well. Where facilitators would seek to converge on a decision point, I will often take the workshop in a different direction. And what you're actually doing when you're taking it a different direction, you're exploring a different dimension.
Mm-hmm.
And it means that you're exploring something or viewing something from different angles. And people will make their own decisions about what's important, what threads to carry across as they go from go in one direction versus another. And it's all ways of making sure that the most important things do bubble up to the top, that people get are honest about what's in our way, what things would we like to achieve. They have a chance to articulate together what they would like things to be like, and those then energize the process of finding solutions, interventions, whatever you want to call them.
That was a big insight for me, the idea of avoiding convergence too early, right?
Yeah,
Because typically as a facilitator, we've all seen the facilitator, everybody kind of agrees, and there's people who don't agree, but they're the silent detractors, they don't feel like they should speak up. Okay, great, meeting's done, we were successful. And then you come out of it and you go, well, and then 2 weeks later you're not seeing the results that you thought you were getting, and the question is, well, why didn't we land there? Well, it's because we converged too early. We went with the loudest voice or the most pressing opinion at the time. We didn't
yeah,
actually take the time to be on. And I think it comes down to uncomfortability, Mike. I think it's
yes,
being comfortable with being uncomfortable, to let things like a bellows move in and out until you land where you need to land.
yes, yes. Although I mean, I don't actually think it has to be too uncomfortable. I think, again, we are so. I think everyone's very familiar, whether they know where the model comes from. People are so familiar with the diverge converge thing,
Mm-hmm.
and the so-called groan zone in the middle.
Yeah.
Um, But actually, with short conversations and conversations that take a 90-degree turn into a new dimension, every few minutes, it doesn't actually have to be uncomfortable, so long as people have a sense of, that this is going to take them somewhere productive.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just one of the things I'm learning is to, be as revealing as I need to be at the beginning of the process, that people understand how it works and why, and that they feel that they've got something they can contribute at every stage of the process, and they will end up with things they're going to want to try doing, inspired by things that they want and they've agreed that they want with other people, and so on and so on. And that's improving my own facilitation, my trainings, and so on. I guess it's good to make these things explicit because
Right.
I've it's fed back. It's fed back on the practice, and that's always good.
Yeah. If it makes sense up here, you got to get it out. I'm currently authoring my own book because I have all these ideas. I need to write it. And I find that just by writing it, you'll
Yes,
write it and you go, well, this is terrible. Like this doesn't make any sense. But and you realize you had
yes,
two completely orthogonal ideas bouncing off
yes,
each other. That
yes,
act,
yes.
gets it out and makes you go, oh, yeah.
Yes, and if you're honest and you say something, you then got to ask, well, is the way I really work actually true to what I've just written?
Right.
And
Right.
where it wasn't as true as it could have been to what I've written, I've actually tested the boundaries of it. I'm not completely black and white about these things. I don't say no convergence, never converge, never prioritize, never choose. Um, I think the message actually more powerful than that. It's something you can calibrate.
Right.
There are choices you can take as a facilitator, as the host of an experience. How convergent, how divergent do I want it to be? How do we need it to be? Are we looking to get to a decision, or are we looking to explore a space together and let people not just make of it what they will, but actually work coherently, separately and together afterwards? So when you're clear about what the overall goal is, you can then make some better decisions about how you configure the experience.
So speaking of a better goal, I love the fact that you start with the idea, and I've been in a bunch, true, I guess disclaimer, I've been in a bunch of Mike's workshops. You start with the idea of setting the context. Do we all understand who we are, why we're here, and what we're trying to solve for?
Yes,
And I think when I think back in my career, some of the gnarliest meetings I've been in, we have walked in with an assumption that all three of those were answered, and we all shared that
yes,
mindset. And
yes,
then real quickly, things get squirrely
yes,
because I thought we were going one way and you thought we were going another, and we never took the time to understand that, hey, where are we starting from? Let's just,
yes,
before we even dive
yes.
in, where are the blocks? Am I swimming in a completely different pool, doing a different
Well,
race?
exactly. So for the sake of a 2-minute conversation, you waste half an hour of meeting until someone actually says, "Hey, can we step back a bit here?"
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
we've all been in those situations. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I was a big fan. The other thing that there was so much in here we could talk for hours. I loved how you start talking about, well, another thing that was new for you, right? You've never written like this before in your previous books, I don't think, right? The idea of there's a story within the story of you have a bunch of different named actors having the conversation, you have a facilitator, and you're actually talking through. This is why, again, everyone, for a short book, this is really insightful. You're talking through in the facilitator's shoes, they see this
Yeah.
and they would react by doing this. Well, the attendees would do this. And you use those named actors as a way to conceptualize everything and the actual activities into a way where, oh, I see, there's a narrative going along with it. I can put the theory and practice together.
Yes,
Makes total sense.
yes, yes. I mean, that again that was actually Jervis's influence again. We wanted not exactly case studies, but it needs to be illustrated. And it's very easy, as you know, a lot of my exercises involve asking questions, and you can ask those questions, but you're only then seeing one side of the conversation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Now, the cool thing about these questions is it's not me asking them as the facilitator, asking them from the front. These are questions I give to people as the host, and then mostly in breakout groups, they're asking these questions of each other. So there's this rubbing off happening. Where that works, they're going to bring those questions back into their workplace as well. And that's something I've always thought was really cool about what we do. The challenge is that some people can't imagine what that conversation is going to be like.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true reading the book, and it's true also in a workshop or a training where you give these questions. These are the ones you're going to be asking each other, and actually modeling them in a whole room first is actually a really, really important practice. I've done that for years with 15-minute photo, the clean language game that I invented.
Mike, I've had that printed up here since our class. And I find myself, and I have it purposefully next to my monitor so I can look over real quickly. And it doesn't look like I'm ignoring you because I'm trying to. Those
Yeah.
questions, everybody who's listening, right? Go to Mike's site. There's the diagram on how to run this thing. Even using half these questions, you will get so much
Yes.
more. You get when using people's own words to re-describe the context back to them and have them explain, you get so much more mileage out of it.
Yes.
You really do.
Yes. But it's important for people to, particularly with that game, it's important for people to understand like the rhythm of it, and to understand that actually they can take it a lot further than they might think, and not settle just for an answer or two. You know, one or two questions, one or two answers. This shows my naivety as a facilitator, perhaps. But I'm realizing that I should be doing more of that sooner. You know, some of the easier and simpler exercises. What I don't want to do is like pollute the conversation with my own examples.
Right.
So the trick, of course, is to ask the questions, but you're asking the questions, and it's of their context and it's their ideas and so on. So that's that clean language idea that's built into 15-minute photo. I can actually pull that into some of the earlier conversations as well. And once people have got the hang of these questions, hang of the rhythm of it and all the rest of it, then over time it gets less important, and we can focus more, you know, on the content and the process and so on. But yeah, I'm always learning. I write these books because I'm sharing stuff that has worked for me, does work for me, and particularly because it is transferable to others. Other people are using this stuff as well successfully. But that doesn't mean I'm the perfect host, the perfect facilitator. You know, always trying to refine and improve. Sometimes that involves changing the material. Sometimes it's just tweaks to my own style as I facilitate, as a host, as I teach, whatever I'm doing. Yeah.
You have a lot of emphasis. You talk a lot about the idea of outcomes and the idea of strategy. And there's a one-liner in the book, Mike, which I'll share the story. I shared it with a good friend of mine who's an IT guy, where you said something along the lines of outcomes are raw input to your strategy, right? Yeah. Raw material for your strategy.
Yes.
I was having this conversation with a buddy who's a quasi RTE in a big insurance company, and we were bitching about OKRs, right? Everybody's doing OKRs these days. And one of the things we were talking through right after I read this book, I pointed it out to him. What we're looking for as objectives, arguably outcomes, but objectives, and our stated strategy are completely divergent. Like the strategy that we've said that this is our strategy, but yes. Then on one hand we say this is the strategy, on the other hand we say this is the objectives, outcomes we're looking for, and they are literally going in opposite directions. So him and I are chatting about this, and it was one of those like quiet Zoom meetings where you're both just kind of looking at each other. And I said, "So what are you going to do about it?" And he just started making noise because he's like, "I don't even know how do I get someone to see that what you've said on both hands are not talking to one another." And I thought that was a really insightful. It just happened to fall into my lap at the right time. I thought that was really insightful because think about it. With these objectives, do they tie to our greater strategy? And if they don't, you might have some wobble there. You need to go back to the well and think about.
Yes, yes. I mean, too often a strategy is kind of actually isn't a strategy.
Right.
It's just some aspiration, or it's some solution that we're rolling out. And we use those to justify the solutions we wanted to roll out anyway, and so on. And I will say it again. I've said it before. I'm going to say again. You know, my caricature of those 1990s models. You know, choose a solution, sell a solution using those outcomes, roll out the solution, live with the consequences, and we all know how that goes.
Yes.
But if we put agreements on outcomes before solutions, that is a game changer. Completely different game. Outcomes plural. Outcomes grounded in reality by obstacles, plural. Obstacles and outcomes being the fuel for solutions, but not big monolithic solutions, small solutions, a steady, you know, continuous stream of them. That's just a completely different game. Those solutions coming from people close to the problem, as I've said already. The outcomes before solutions is a game changer. And organize those outcomes into a strategy that's way more robust than a strategy that's based on a solution. Because if your first solution doesn't work, you try a different one.
Right.
If your solution is all you have, then what are you left with?
Exactly. Then to your point, you end up with some hodgepodge of gobbledygook, corporate speak, to rationalize what you're planning on doing anyway. Yes. Right. It's like post facto logic. One of the things that, and I'm just flipping through the book to grab my highlights. One of the things that you talked about closer towards the end when you were talking about outcomes, the idea of fantastic and intriguing options. I started grinning because I love the idea of well, okay, what would be the most fantastic option? And reality comes, you can distort reality. Steve Jobs proved that. Elon does to an extent. But even identifying the maybe potentially possible, you may end up
Yes.
with a better probable than you started with. And I was reading through that and I highlighted it and underlined it. I'm like, yeah, I got to use this because it makes you think, right? Gets you out of where you're, again, the
Yes.
premature convergence. Okay, well, this is safe. Let's go with this.
Yes. I mean, yeah, a lot of it depends also on what you're optimizing for as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, if you're optimizing for learning and learning in two possible senses, we're trying this for the first time, let's learn how this process works. Or if you're optimizing for learning in the sense of let's stimulate the system, stimulate our customers in such a way that will give us insights that we won't get any other way. You don't want the easy options, the low-hanging fruit. You want to try things that might fail. And so that's why I talk about, intriguing outcomes and,
Mhm.
those kinds of things, outcomes and solutions as being, intriguing or whatever, those kinds of words, um, because it's where the ambiguity is actually where the value is.
Right.
If we only go for the boring stuff, we're not going to get very far very quickly.
Well, you just get
If we go too far the other way, then who knows what's going to happen. But there is a sweet spot in the middle where we're going to have enough success, and enough of those successes are going to be great, or lead to huge amounts of learning that it's worth doing. In the end, you don't want to be doing only one kind of thing. The low-hanging fruit still needs to be plucked. It's there. Why not harvest it? But we need to push ourselves a bit as well. And maybe even a few extreme bets, as long as they're safe. You don't want to bet the business on something
right.
when you don't
That's
need to. Yeah.
yeah. That's a hell of a. You're not the FedEx CEO with what is it? What did he take his entire that story where he took all the money in the corporate account, went to Vegas, put it on black, and that's how he
Right.
made payroll that one week. So I like that you brought up the idea of learning because there's another chunk in that I highlighted in the book where you talk about your definition of done and
Ah,
really done.
yes.
Right? So definition of done, your definition of done is someone's need was met.
Yes.
Whereas when something is really done is when you have accounted for the learning. And I introduced this to colleagues at my current job, and I said, okay, so are we done or are we really done? And it drives an interesting conversation because you can't just chuck it in the prod or deliver the whatever and be done with it. You need to think about, okay, where did that get us and how did that land? That it's like the clean questions, that extra second of waiting and thinking and asking the right way. You may end up in a completely, again, intriguing. You're going to end up in somewhere that you might not have planned on ending up in the first place.
Yes. Well, that's kind of right to left is where we're going with here. Yeah. So my definition of done, and I used to joke for years, oh, this is the only definition of done you'll ever need. Someone's need was met. Um, those stickies on the right-hand column of the Kanban board, are they staying done?
Mm,
And sometimes they don't. And what are we hearing from production while they're out there? But then the time comes to actually, review them and review the experience of, the past couple of weeks or however long it's been, and account for that learning. And there is just so much learning to be had. I think we underestimate just how much learning there is, from the customer side, from the process side, the decisions we took on how we were going to work in general and in particular on those pieces of work, how we decided to organize ourselves, how we agreed we would relate to each other, all the assumptions that went into those early decisions and so on. There was an absolute ton of learning opportunity there.
mm,
And when you think of your process as asking the right questions at the right time, those are generating decision points and learning opportunities every day. But you can also ask, are we asking the right questions at the right time? So you take it back a level. So working backwards from those key moments of impact and learning. So when we get to done and really done, keeping that in the foreground, working backwards from them, amplifying those. That's what containers. This is the jargon of OD actually that's come into Scrum and to other parts of Agile. That's what a container for learning is all about.
mm.
We're framing the work and managing the work in such a way that we amplify all those opportunities for learning.
Right.
That's part actually of why this book exists. I think what Jervis thought was I could bring some lean agile rigor, shall we say, into and combine that with dialogic OD, and he was sure that something interesting would come out of it. I mean, I guess he had an existence proof already in the Agenda Shifts book,
Mm.
but the new book is framed more in OD terms, and I think it's great that it is. You know, it's clearly not specific to technology. It's not specific to
Yes.
agile. No, we are having some conversations about the organization, conversations that will empower people to improve it. You know, that's the basic idea.
Right, right. So you brought it up early, Mike. So I want to loop back on it. You said you're working on book number 5. What is
Yes.
that? What is that looking like? What I mean, I'm not looking for plot spoilers, but what is your central crux like? What are your eyes coalescing against? And then most importantly, when do you hope to have it done?
So I'll start. I'll do that last question first. I'm being really careful not to give dates.
Okay.
Book 5 feels like the culmination of everything I've ever done,
Okay.
and I want it to be. I'm not going to say perfect, but I want it to be as good as it possibly can be. I've written part 1 of 2 parts, and part 1 is reviewing well. You know, I think I'm in a pretty good place, and it's based on training that I do. So, you know, I know that it all works. You know, and now I just have to put it into words. It was actually quite an ambitious book. So what I'm doing, I'm taking something classic, the viable system model, something from the 1970s from the systems community.
Stafford Beer, right?
Stafford Beer, that's quite correct. But looking at it from the perspective not of analysis, drawing models, all those kinds of things, but how do we use that as a framework, a lens on the organization in a participatory experience?
Mm.
So it takes, you know, book 4 and 5 in a way go together. You know, the tools of book 4 are being applied into book 5. And you know, at no point do we ask anyone to draw a model of the organization. It's a way for people to, again, to enhance their vision, shall we say, of the organization. And through that participatory process, different aspects of the organization bubble up to the front, things that we want to change, things that constraints that affect all of us, ideas that we have for improving it, and so on. But the model is super, super powerful. It is an amazing diagnostic tool, but that doesn't mean we have to use it in the linear diagnostic, you know, approach of you know, that is traditionally used in. I'm trying. My ambition is to write a book that both the systems community and the complexity community will be happy with, and it's that
That's
dialogic.
a tall
That's
order, my friend.
that is a tall order, but I think it's the what squares that circle is that dialogic dimension, that participatory thing. People need to understand the model just enough to use it as a lens on the organization. That's not actually a big ask. And in fact, when I do the workshops, it's actually the assessment tool does most of the work for you. So people don't need to be taught how to become, you know, big users of the model. They just need to use the model to help them recognize that certain things might be happening. It's very much a relational model. Are these relationships healthy and productive between different aspects of the organization? And you can bring in the theory if you need to, but most of the work, for most of the time, your intuition is good enough. You know when how you coordinate isn't working well with how you want to work, for example. You know when you're sticking too long with a strategy that ought to be changing. Really, really, really common things. It's amazing a model with so few elements can be so powerful. It works because it works at every scale. It works at team level, it works at team levels, it works at whole organization level. And then couple that, or you know, the cross product with imbalances of power, imbalances of, you know, information, how much there is, its structure, its sequence, all those kinds of things, and so on and so on. You know, that all multiplies up, and it's hugely, you know, it's hugely powerful, and it plays well with complexity because we don't privilege any one perspective. You know, we're not drawing a model. We're letting the conversations do the work, and where where we have things in common, even when we come from different parts of the organization, that tells you something interesting. There must be some shared constraint at work in the organization, one that we can fix locally, or perhaps look for a way to change it more globally.
I love the idea of knowing just enough about the model to use it to get to the outcomes I'm looking for, as opposed to overemphasizing you need to become a master of this model.
Yes,
And then you're into the iron law of institutions where you're
not there's a whole chapter, well, really part two is about scaling, but it's not a model to implement, it's a model to understand what's going on. And this is what frustrates me about the agile approach to scaling. If all you understand is process and you want to scale it, you'll just end up with bigger and more complicated process. If you understand the challenges of scale and recognize the imbalances, the dysfunctions, why not just do something about them?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not to say that there's no value in these frameworks, not at all. And, the fact that we've got, proofs at least of concept of how things can work together, if not proofs in practice of how these things can work together. That can energize our search for solutions to the organizational problems that we face. But I can't accept that to an organizational problem, a rollout is the answer. It's the wrong kind of solution to the wrong kind of challenge.
Yeah, you back to take the conversation full circle. You're not even sure what problem you're trying to solve. If you're just going to paste this process on, well, you're going to get the results you're going to get.
And if you've got an adaptive challenge, then it and your understanding of it will change as you engage with it. That's in the nature of the beast.
There goes the whole, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. Yeah. Very, very great. Very great. So, Mike, coming up on time, people who are looking for more information, want to follow you, find out some more details, not only about this book, but Agenda Shift. Obviously, we'll put a link to the book in the show notes. Where do they go? Where do they find you?
Well, agendashift.com will find me, I'm pretty easy to find. You find me on LinkedIn easily enough. There's the Agenda Shift blog. There's the Agenda Shift Academy as well. Best way to find that is actually via the Agenda Shift homepage. The Agenda Shift Academy site. We're moving from an old site to a newer one. So I don't want to give URLs out or anything. There's a whole curriculum of leading with outcomes that you can study online in your own time, self-paced training and all of that. I do a certain amount of public training, not as much as I used to. It doesn't fit well with my family circumstances without going into details.
Right.
But I do a certain amount. I don't travel as much as I used to, but I have made a couple of trips abroad, work-related trips abroad in the last year, and I will from time to time be doing that. I'm very fortunate to have this great room to work out of.
Yes, if everybody was so lucky.
Yeah, so I'm easy to find, easy to approach, and particularly in relation to books 4 and 5. I mean, book 5 is half written and being reviewed, and if you've got any particular expertise in the systems side or the complexity side, I'm always very interested to hear people's feedback on it. And the book's not going to be published until I think it's ready. I'll only know that when people I trust have given me honest feedback.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Don't commit to a date.
That's not to say there couldn't be more. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, Mike, I want to thank you so much for your time again this morning. We really appreciate it. On behalf of Mike and myself, I want to thank all of you for tuning in and listening once again. You know where to find us on Discord. New episode every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern. So thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you would go down the path with Mike's work and you enjoy it. And until next time, this is the Agile Uprising Podcast signing out.